In this fantastic and engaging contemporary era, when anyone can publish content on various platforms, where freedom of speech, thoughts, and ideas are no longer censored and gate-kept as before. When ordinary people around the world have the opportunity to collaborate across borders, to try to figure out what is happening around us, and what has happened in history before. When young, engaged, and courageous people dare to challenge the thoroughly corrupt establishment in various countries. A form of grassroots movement that is incredibly inspiring, developing, and democratic. When news about important events now quickly appears on unfiltered and uncensored platforms, and immediately reveals exactly how the usual news reporting we were previously fed with clearly shows how traditional mainstream media angles and filters information that does not fit their activist agenda. Then there is finally hope for the world to become more objectively enlightened and, for once in a long time, form one's own opinion based on facts, and actually what gives citizen voting democracies a real opportunity to make well-informed choices based on factual and impartial information. When one can openly share thoughts, share ways to scrutinize material, share previous methods and experiences that have been used to deceive populations around the world, it is amazing to see how this movement is growing among engaged, courageous, and driven honorable people. The present, curious, and socially engaged who refuse to sit as uncritical brainwashed puppets in the face of the propaganda we have been fed for decades. In times now when historical information is emerging about how the world has been governed for so long, it is incredibly important for people and populations in the world to learn how deceived people in different countries have been by their own elected officials, the responsible authorities, and the propaganda in the media. And when the mass awakening begins to spread and take shape about what has happened in the world for several decades, and how the evil old world order has ruled through blackmail and involvement of secret deep states, there are many points and opportunities to also highlight a specific very important event in its entirety, which can better explain how, and in what way, the hammering propaganda from the establishment in various Western countries has functioned. How a cover-up of a horrific event, like a prime minister's murder, works, and that together with the knowledge, experiences, and tools, we can solve more of the major strange events that have occurred. That is why a film with more realistic and knowledge-based descriptions of what happened on Sveavägen in Stockholm, on a cold February evening in 1986 is still so relevant and important, so that Sweden and even the world can heal and look forward to a more peaceful, open, and honorable world for the sake of our future generations. Something that even the current American administration has given the appearance of wanting to strive for. When the awakening about the now transparent methods, the dark forces, that have long been used to scare, silence, threaten, oppress, and cancel, no longer have any effect. When it no longer works to label critical voices as racist, homophobe, misogynist, conspiracy theorist, Islamophobe, anti-Semite, or anti-establishment extremist. When this method no longer takes hold, the world is on the way to waking up from an oppressed slumber. When one can finally think and express oneself freely about previously labeled conspiracy theories, like an actual population replacement, and it might be pedophiles and thoroughly corrupt parasites who rule the world, then it is no longer just the American capital swamp that the world needs to drain, but also all other thoroughly corrupt deep slave states around the world in other countries, especially those that have been part of, involved in, and aware of the whole thing for decades. And now when it becomes so clear that different countries' elitist governments are fighting so hard to restrict freedom of speech and force ordinary honorable people into submission, and scare with punishments against everything that is to be incorporated into the concept of hate, just to give the appearance that people can no longer be criticized, it is a very dangerous path we are on. How nowadays people are arrested just for expressing an opinion with strong sympathies for their own people and their own culture. It is so revealing in how all this is deliberate and intentional. Wrapped in socialist, communist, dictatorial corrupting activism. And it is really here that both knowledge, real evidence, and methods are pure tools to help each other move forward in that work. Therefore, one of these in the series of unsolved political murders that happened 40 years ago is a fantastically good start, in allowing one of the long-labeled conspiracy theories to transform into a common reasonable theory, and an explanation of what actually happened. In one of the world's largest unsolved murder investigations, as it is said, which would take 9 years just to go through the material in the investigation, we will show that there was a much simpler way. By digging into real circumstances, witnesses' concrete statements, and whistleblowers' fantastic information, we will be able to give a complete picture of what reasonably happened at the murder and the subsequent cover-up. And it is when, with the right knowledge, methods, and commitment, one can go all the way and inspire others to contribute to engaging and spreading, so that the truths come to light. Especially for future generations who deserve an honest, more genuine, and better world than the one we others grew up in. It is this unsolved Swedish Prime Minister murder that this film will be about, and also to place it in and contextualize it right up to today's context in world politics. The murder, often called the Swedish John F. Kennedy murder, so that people around the world understand what an open wound this murder in open street still is for large parts of the Swedish population. A 40-year-old unsolved Prime Minister murder that deserves a real revelation, and not all the fake solutions that the Swedish establishment has tried to sell to its own deceived population for 4 decades. Now, when truths about how previous regime changes and leader changes have been carried out in the world, it becomes all the more relevant to also bring the Palme murder into this context, and finally bring forward what happened on Sveavägen almost 40 years ago, when Sweden's democratically elected Prime Minister was completely cold-bloodedly executed on a central street in Sweden's capital, in front of the eyes of his own wife and a large number of shocked, innocent witnesses. For real truth seekers, the evidence of how the entire murder was covered up will be incredibly valuable in interpreting both the present and history. And as most will understand, this film is part of a real cry for help from the Swedish deceived population, and the hope is that the world's truth seekers can also help free us Swedes from the establishment's complete grip on the psychological abuse that honorable people have been subjected to. Ordinary people who just want to participate and live in a world they understand. With all the many parallels that exist between this murder investigation and other major political assassinations, there are many concrete, unpleasant connections between several of the events. If you are already interested in the murder of John F. Kennedy, you are probably right to engage in this case as well. It is now that we have the chance to help each other and bring forward all the previous heroes, who as whistleblowers, took all the shit for what they engaged in. It is now that we together can give redress to all those who were previously affected and who were diminished, ridiculed, and threatened. It is now the chance for the good and those who hope for a better world to engage in a real paradigm shift, when the sick old world crossed all boundaries in the hunt to maintain its world order. There are also so many inspiring people right now to draw facts and evidence from, like Jeffrey Sachs, John Mearsheimer, Scott Horton, Ola Tunander, etc. The following film has its origin and describes a multi-year private investigative project, based on witness psychological knowledge and methods as a foundation. That we with witness psychological knowledge have figured out what actually happened, who has been involved, but above all how it happened, when Swedish politicians, authorities, and media have acted to lure in, threaten, silence, diminish witnesses, and deceive the Swedish population for almost 40 years. In the fake investigation and cover-up that has been conducted ever since the shots fell on Sveavägen a cold February evening about 40 years ago. It all started in the fall of 2021, when it became obvious how a state-supported and tax-funded cover-up just continued year after year and continued to point out completely innocent people for the murder of the Prime Minister in the same transparent pattern they have always done. Even obviously overdramatized in an accusatory series on Netflix. Evidence, conclusions, and revelations are based on available material that is accessible on the internet, in archives, and in media. Everyone can form their own opinion about the truthfulness of evidence and conclusions, but to understand the methods and how a state-controlled propaganda cover-up of a prime minister murder and how one of the world's largest murder fake investigations has proceeded, has advantages for all people to understand and partake in for the future. Surely there are people who will react negatively to the information and evidence that will be brought forward and would rather live in a simple and predictable naive world, where politicians, authorities, and media are judged to stand for the stable and secure in society and in the world. And for these people, this film is probably nothing you will enjoy, want to understand, or take in. You might do best to stop watching right here. Otherwise, it is possible that your awakening could become too world-shaking.